What's happening, everybody? On today's show, more assistant coaching news across the SEC and who has the most to prove this year among SEC head football coaches. Locked On SEC starts right now.
You are Locked On SEC, your daily podcast on the Southeastern Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And what's up, everybody? Welcome into Locked On SEC. It's great to have you guys along. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app today, create an account, use our code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. I'm Chris Gordy. Thanks for making Locked On SEC your first listen every day. Shout out to our everydayers. They're free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day. We got plenty to discuss, so let's dive into it. Let's go around the conference.
Boots out to the right. Takes the handoff. What a catch!
Around the conference.
And we start over at Florida as Billy Napier giving one of his assistants a promotion. According to reports, Gators tight ends coach Russ Callaway is going to be given the title of co-offensive coordinator. Callaway's been on staff at Florida since Napier's been there. He started as a defensive intern in 2022, filled the tight ends coaching vacancy a year ago. Prior to that, he had spent 5 seasons at Samford, where he was in a variety of roles, including offensive coordinator. 2020, he spent at LSU as a senior offensive analyst, and then was with the New York Giants staff in 2021 as an offensive assistant. So, as we understand it, Billy Napier will be the primary play caller. Rob Sale, longtime offensive line coach, who was also on the Giants staff, he holds the title of offensive coordinator. Russ Callaway will be co-offensive coordinator. So a lot of cooks in the kitchen there in Gainesville. But Callaway's OC experience led to some thoughts on, hey, can he be more involved in the offensive scheme? And earlier this month, Napier was asked about Callaway's role on National Signing Day. Napier said, well, look, I've worked closely with Russ for a year. I think ultimately he's a guy that obviously is going to acquire more responsibility. How we define that, I think we'll work our way through that. Russ is a heck of a young coach, much like me. He's worked on defense in the past as a young coach. He's called plays at different levels, played quarterback. He's a guy that we certainly are excited about. He definitely will be in our future, require more responsibility. So there you have it. Napier said that about a month ago, and now here we are, Russ Callaway, co-offensive coordinator. Now, Napier also has a new strength staffer coming in. Jesse Ackerman is coming back to Gainesville to join Florida's staff. He will be the associate director of player performance, according to On 30 Sports. He was previously on staff at Florida from 2012 to 2015, working under Will Muschamp and Jim McElwain. Matt Zenitz also reported that Florida defensive grad assistant Kali James is leaving for an on-field opportunity at Jackson State. Difference there. Gators still have an on-field assistant coach opening as Darnell Stapleton, who coached along the offensive line with Sale. He was hired by the Commanders a little over a week ago. Over Georgia, one of their longtime assistants, the last 8 seasons, Del McGee, officially named the new head coach of Georgia State on Friday evening. McGee is the 4th head coach in their program's history, but took some time out to thank Kirby Smart for his time at Georgia. He said, look, I've spent 20-plus years coaching in the state of Georgia. Very grateful for Coach Smart and the University of Georgia for supporting me in my dream of becoming a head coach. With the Bulldogs, McGee was one of the country's top recruiters, and as running backs coach, he helped 4 different ball carriers rush for 1,000 yards. Nick Chubb, Sony Michel, DeAndre Swift, and Elijah Holyfield. He also helped James Cook and Zamir White join Chubb, Michel, and Swift as picks in the first 4 rounds of the NFL draft. McGee was on staff at Georgia Southern back in 2014 and 15 as running backs coach before coming over to Georgia, but he will succeed Sean Elliott as head coach at Georgia State. Sean Elliott recently resigned to go back to South Carolina as an assistant coach. Georgia making a hire to replace Brian McClendon, who was their wide receivers coach, who left for an opportunity with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. According to 24/7 Sports, James Coley returning to Georgia as their new wide receivers coach. Coley was on Kirby Smart's initial staff as wide receivers coach back in 2016. And 2017 and 2018, he was named Georgia's co-offensive coordinator, quarterbacks coach. And in 2019, he was the sole OC while continuing to coach up Georgia's quarterbacks. He was relieved of his OC duties after 2019, then joined Jimbo Fisher's staff at A&M. Spent 4 seasons there, working with wide receivers and tight ends. So Coley was on the move this offseason after they cleaned house at Texas A&M. He had joined Shane Beamer's South Carolina staff as wide receivers coach back in January last month, but Georgia comes calling, you go to Georgia. So James Coley, not going to South Carolina, going back to Georgia, where he will be their wide receivers coach. Over to Alabama, they officially announced the hiring of Courtney Morgan as their general manager. Morgan previously served in a similar role under Kalen DeBoer at Washington. DeBoer said in a statement, Courtney is such an important part of our program, has great relationships across the country, and is an essential part of helping us recruit and evaluate talent at the high school level and in the transfer portal. Alabama's announcement also defined what his role will be. It said Morgan will be tasked with managing the Tide's roster while overseeing and directing the daily operations of both the personnel and recruiting departments. It will help organize the head coaches, film evaluations, and communication as well. It's interesting. A lot of programs now have a quote-unquote general manager. You kind of need it. There's a lot going on now with transfer portal, NIL, recruiting. You got to have somebody staying on top of everything. And Courtney Morgan said he's excited to work alongside Kalen DeBoer again. He said, I loved working for him and looking forward to continuing the standard that Alabama football set. Morgan played at Michigan from 99 to 2003. Was a 3-year letter winner on the O-line for Michigan. Played his career in college football with stints at Michigan, Fresno State, and UCLA. So see what Courtney Morgan brings to the Alabama Crimson Tide in his time there. Over Kentucky, they have finalized plans for their spring game. The annual blue-white spring game will be held at Kroger Field Saturday, April 13th. Tentative kickoff set for 1 p.m. Eastern. The program also confirmed fans will be able to sit wherever they want within the lower bowl. The upper deck will open only if the lower bowl fills, but free parking will be available in the lots around the stadium. This, of course, is the return of the spring game to Kroger Field. Last year, they did not have it in Kroger Field as the playing surface was being replaced, so they had an open practice at the Joe Kraft football training facility. But Kentucky spring game will be the first to see a lot of new pieces for Kentucky, including their new quarterback, Brock Vandegrift, transferring in over from Georgia. So spring game will be televised, of course, on SEC Network Plus. But if you're a Wildcat fan in the Lexington area, you want to book your trip there for the spring game on April 13th. And as we get more dates announced here, we'll just do a whole show where we go back over all the spring dates for SEC schools. Got over half of them announced by now, so we'll do that real soon. Over at Texas A&M, defensive back Jacoby Matthews is hitting the transfer portal. According to On3 Sports, Matthews enters the portal. He enrolled at A&M in May of 2022. And while graduates can enter the portal at any time, undergrads have to wait for the next window, which is April 16th. So Matthews announcing he plans to enter the portal. So nobody reach out to him yet. He's got to wait the 2 months before he can enter the portal officially. But he's played 21 games for the Aggies, his 2 full years of remaining eligibility. Played 11 games last year, made 9 starts, and was a Louisiana native, originally a 4-star recruit, number 2 safety in that class, and experienced SEC defensive back. A lot of people will be looking to add him. We'll see if LSU gets in the mix, brings him back home to Louisiana. Over at Tennessee, some news came out on Friday. The NCAA took a blow as they continue to work through the legalities of enforcing their NIL policies. Federal Judge Clifton Corker granted a request for a preliminary injunction that was made in a lawsuit last month by the states of Tennessee and Virginia. That means the NCAA, at least for now, will be unable to enforce its NIL-related recruiting rules against Tennessee or any other school in the state. This is the latest in a long line of courtroom losses for the NCAA. Earlier this year, a court ruled the NCAA could not enforce their multi-time transfer policy, which previously required non-grad transfers to sit out for a season upon transferring multiple times. So, yeah, that story is not going away anytime soon. We will be tracking that and seeing what happens with other states when it comes to the NCAA and NIL, because, man, it is wide open and a lot still to be determined there. All right, more to come here on Locked On SEC when we return. Which coach in the SEC or coaches have the most to prove? We'll talk about that coming up in just a second. But first, I want to remind you guys, this episode is presented to you by our friends over at FanDuel. You can get your buckets on with your first big bet over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Go check them out right now on their website. It is FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel.com/lockedon. You want to make sure you put in that locked on, because that's what's going to get you the special offer they got going there for you. And then once you signed up, you can download the FanDuel app and check out all the great offers and spreads they got going on there. Quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, whatever it is. Plenty of NBA action still to go as we get closer to the summer months. And, of course, you guys know the NBA playoffs stretch a while. So all that action is up there for you at FanDuel. Again, visit them. FanDuel.com/lockedon is the website. And they are FanDuel. They are the official sportsbook partner of the NBA. SEC. Thank you guys for making us your first listen every day. Shout out to everydayers. We'll go back tomorrow on the show to catch you up on all the latest stuff going on around the SEC. Coming up next segment, we'll dive into a little bit of the SEC hoops action from over the weekend. There was a lot going on, so we'll get to that in just a second. But I wanted to get to first, 24/7 Sports has put out a piece where they named 15 Power Conference head coaches with the most to prove in 2024. And as they say, some coaches find themselves in a situation with more to prove than others based on all the different dynamics. So as we look at the SEC, they singled out 4 different coaches with the most to prove this year. We start over in Columbia, South Carolina. As they say, South Carolina, considerable hype surrounding their program in 2023, coming off one of their better seasons in 5 years back in 2022. But the transfer portal losses were too much to overcome, and the Gamecocks failed to reach a bowl game for the first time under Shane Beamer's tenure. His 3-11 record against ranked opponents over the past 3 years shows there are steps needed to get South Carolina into the middle tier of the SEC. This upcoming season is undoubtedly a prove-it year for Shane Beamer, with a strong incoming recruiting class and a really strong transfer portal class as well. So, it was a big step back for Shane Beamer and company last year. If they miss a bowl game again this year, you have to wonder, will the word hot seat get thrown around with Shane Beamer? Because as beloved as he was, look, you have 2 bad years, they turn on you very quickly at any program across the SEC. All right, another coach on the 24/7 Sports list of most to prove. And this one's interesting because, some of these names are guys we would consider on the hot seat, but Lane Kiffin, not so much on the hot seat at Ole Miss. But as they say in 24/7 Sports article, Lane Kiffin led Ole Miss to a pair of New Year's Six bowl games so far during his time there in Oxford. But so did former Rebels head coaches Hugh Freeze and Houston Nutt. Ole Miss went all in on the transfer portal with hopes of being a top contender in the SEC this year, potentially securing a bid in the expanded college football playoff. As we know, it's gone to 12 teams this year. Lane Kiffin needs to prove those roster moves and the money spent on NIL were well worth it. Fortunately for Ole Miss, their schedule is very favorable. I talked about that last week on the show, right? 10-2 is what you need to do to get at least have a great chance to get into the 12-team playoff. And Ole Miss's schedule very forgiving this year. So Very likely that's going to happen there for Lane Kiffin Ole Miss. So a lot to prove, but only a lot to prove because he has raised those expectations there in Oxford. Two more coaches they got on this list of coaches with the most approved this year over at Arkansas. They've got Sam Pittman on here as 24/7 Sports writes. Arkansas opted to not make a change at head coach following last season, which saw the Razorbacks finish with just 4 wins. Sam Pittman has experienced a steady decline in Fayetteville after he guided them to their highest single win total in more than a decade back in 2021 when he won 9 games. But the 11-23 record against SEC competition does not measure up to their expectations there in Fayetteville either. Pressure is on Sam Pittman to prove he can get the Razorbacks trending in the right direction once again. Yeah, I think at minimum 6-6 is what he's got to do. You got to, obviously it's an improvement on the win total, but you got to get to a bowl game and, got to start recruiting a little bit better. That was the whole skinny on Sam Pittman was, good old line coach and he can recruit. Yes, sir. But it has not gone that way these last 2 seasons. So let's see what Sam Pittman can do this year. But certainly a lot to prove for Pittman at Arkansas. And the last coach they have on this list from the SEC, granted it's a bunch of other coaches like Deion Sanders and folks like that from other conferences, but we're only focused on the SEC coaches here. But the next coach on their list, we sent it over to Florida, Billy Napier. They say Billy Napier also owns a losing record after 2 seasons at Florida. The Gators are 11-14 overall under their head coach without a season above 500 yet. The return on investment for Florida is not yet there since hiring Billy Napier from Louisiana back in 2022. Gators should be a top-tier program in the SEC, but back-to-back 3-5 records against league competition since he took over, that proves otherwise. Unfortunately, the 2024 Florida schedule is absolutely brutal, with games against 6 of the 8 teams with the highest projected preseason win totals in the conference. Oh, and then non-conference games against Miami and Florida State, 2 of the early favorites in the ACC. So, going to be tough for Billy Napier, but he's got to do it. He's got to at least get to, I put him in the Sam Pittman category. I think at least 6-6. Everybody knows this schedule is brutal and very tough. But look at a year ago. They were 5-2, and it felt like, oh, man, they're ahead of schedule here. All right. And then they lose whatever. The last handful of games, they finish 5-7. Miss a bowl game. Cannot happen 2 years in a row. For Sam Pittman, he's got to get to a bowl game. For Shane Beamer, he's got to get to a bowl game. For Billy Napier, he's got to get to a bowl game. And for Lane Kiffin, it feels like, man, you better make the playoff, because if not, it's going to be very disappointing. So there you have it. Good piece over there at 24/7 Sports. Encourage you guys to go check it out. Again, we just focused on the 4 guys from the SEC, but they singled out some other coaches like Mac Brown at North Carolina. Big expectations there for him. Deion Sanders. A lot of really good candidates on their list. Go check it out, 247sports.com. Still more to come here on Locked On SEC, part of Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day. For our Hoops heads, we're going to recap the weekend that was in SEC basketball. It's coming your way in just a sec. All right, roll along here. Locked On SEC as we continue on here. I want to dive into a little bit of SEC basketball as there was a lot going on over the weekend. So let's do that right now as we jump into it. Rick Barnes making some history on Saturday. Tennessee's 86-51 win over Texas A&M. Rick Barnes becoming just the 15th coach in Division I men's basketball history to record 800 victories. He's earned 192 of those at Tennessee, 4th amongst active D1 coaches behind only John Calipari, Rick Pitino, and Bill Self. The SEC also acknowledged his accomplishments after the game, but a little over half of Barnes' wins came during his 17-year run at Texas. And again, 192 of those have come in his time there at Tennessee. Crazy to think he's been there as long as he has already. But the Vols have never reached the Final Four, only have one Elite Eight appearance in program history. They're hoping Rick Barnes can take them to new heights or get them there eventually. Tennessee, they're going to host Auburn in a top 25 matchup coming up this Wednesday night. Over at Alabama, Nate Oates was not happy with his team's effort on defense as they lost at Kentucky 117-95 on Saturday night. A lot of issues on the defensive side of the floor. Nate Oates said Kentucky was ready to play and we weren't. Cal had his guys ready to go. I didn't. They looked great. We looked awful. Our defensive intensity was not good. I told our guys after the game we've had question marks about our defense all year. Alabama allowed Kentucky to score 1.46 points per possession. Brutally bad. But on the flip side, Kentucky, they made history in that win. The 117-point outburst, the most points in school history against a team ranked in the AP Top 25. The previous record was set nearly 50 years ago when Kentucky scored 113 against number 13 ranked Notre Dame at the time. But Justin Edwards led the way, 28 points, 4 for 4 from three-point range. Antonio Reeves scored 24 points. He is hoping to be the SEC Player of the Year. And Kentucky moved up to a number 5 seed in Joe Lunardi's latest bracketology after the win. Wildcats will face Mississippi State in Starkville coming up Tuesday night. It's kind of weird. I mean, they have the heartbreaker and loss at the buzzer to LSU last week, but kind of sandwiched around that was a big win at Auburn, and then a big win at home over Alabama, two of the best teams in the SEC. So go figure. Over at Ole Miss, Alan Flanagan was ejected from Saturday night's game between Ole Miss and South Carolina and could face potential discipline from the SEC with an ugly-looking foul. Trailing the Gamecocks in the second half, Flanagan was originally whistled for an offensive foul away from the ball. They went to video review and didn't take for them long to upgrade it to a flagrant 2, which carries an ejection. He left the game with 11 points, but South Carolina was able to finish off the 72-59 win over Ole Miss to improve to 10-4 in conference play. With South Carolina's win and Alabama's loss, the Gamecocks trail Alabama by just 1 game in the SEC standings. So it's going to be an interesting battle for the regular season title in the SEC. Khalif Battle over at Arkansas kept them from being the first SEC team to lose to Missouri this season. Battle went off for 42 points, the most by an SEC player this season, as the Razorbacks beat Mizzou 88-73. He shot 11 of 15 from the field, going 6 of 10 from 3. He was also a perfect 14 for 14 at the free throw line. And Khalif Battle's 42 points, the second most for a Razorback in an SEC contest. He's the first Hog in almost 50 years to score 42 points and grab 6 rebounds. So good stuff from him. Other scores from around the league over the weekend. Mississippi State blew out LSU in Baton Rouge 87-67. Tennessee handled up on Texas A&M in Knoxville 86-51. What's crazy is Buzz Williams and the Aggies, after winning 5 of 6, the Aggies have now lost 4 in a row. So they were already one of those teams, like, a few weeks ago, they were like last 4 in. Then it was like first 4 out. And now it's like they're kind of falling out of even that group because the losses are mounting for them. But we'll see what happens with the Aggies. Auburn, they beat up on Georgia in Athens 97-76. Florida took care of business at home, beating Vanderbilt 77-64. And as we mentioned, Arkansas beat Mizzou, South Carolina beat Ole Miss, and UK beat Bama. Now, speaking of Bama, Alabama basketball, they're going to host ESPN's College Game Day for the first time next month. The traveling pregame show announced Saturday that this coming week's show will originate from Coleman Coliseum ahead of their March 2nd showdown between number 5 Tennessee and number 13 Alabama. The hour-long show will begin at 11 a.m. Central. Reese Davis will be joined by Jay Billis, Seth Greenberg, Andrea Carter, Jay Williams, and Christine Williamson. So it's going to be fun to see that. We just saw them at Auburn a week ago, and it did not go Auburn's way as they lost to Kentucky that night. But we'll see if Tennessee has the same luck going into Coleman Coliseum to knock off Alabama. But that should be a rocking environment. We know that rivalry, as much as it exists on the football field, exists in basketball as well. And Rick Barnes' crew would love nothing more than to hand Nate Oates and Alabama another L. So going to be an awesome environment coming up this weekend. And only a handful of SEC games left. It's been an awesome race for those who've been watching SEC basketball down the stretch of this season. Going to be good. Be interested to see who wins the conference and then how many teams does the SEC get into the NCAA tournament. So that is going to do it for this edition of Locked On SEC. Thank you guys for making us your first listen every day. Shout out to everydayers. Come on back tomorrow on the show. Get you caught up on all the latest news going on around the SEC. Hey, for your second listen, go check out Locked On. Has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today. Just search that in YouTube. You'll find it streaming 24/7. All the top sports stories of the day with our local experts from Locked On, covering every league. I'm Chris Gordy. This has been Locked On SEC. We will talk to you guys tomorrow. Have a great day, everybody.